These at okay, I'm going to speed through those parts, or at least give you a more in-depth view of what I'm trying to do.
Aside from torturing your students?
Aside torturing my students. I'm really not sure what's wrong with that.
Are you demoing something or just
No, it's just not working.
But are you demonstrating or just giving a presentation? Do you want to use mine? Or someone else's?
Let's see this one.
Yeah.
Right. Hopefully this doesn't disappear.
Don't bump the table.
Okay. I think it's done. So okay, when Abdi asked me to give this talk, I'll be very honest, my first reaction was what? I don't really know what to say. But of course, the appropriate response you all give Abdi is sure. I'll give the talk. And so here it is. I'm not here to try and teach anything. I must say this first. Neither am I here to say that I'm better than anyone else at doing what I do. I'm not. I'm here simply to share what I've done. And I hope that I can persuade you, especially those of us who are in the line of education, to change your perspectives on how things can be done. So this is my story, and as all stories go, it begins with a content page. I'm going to try to make this as entertaining as I can. I know it's like everybody's falling asleep. I'm going to start with an introduction to myself. Thank you, Donald, for allowing me to do that, and there's a reason why. I'll also make some apologies, especially to Abdi and Alex.
Why?
I'll talk a bit about the future of jobs and what jobs look like in the next few years, what careers are going to look like. And then I'll mention some problems in our current education system that relate to this future. I'll talk quite a bit on experiential learning. FYI, what Derek showed earlier on, I was like, oops, that looks familiar. And I'm going to show that again, but I'll go into something that is more relevant on this aspect instead of yours.
That's okay, you can just talk about the deep stuff instead.
Yeah, not really deep stuff. And then I'm going to connect the dots and relate this back to MonsoonSIM. So you see there's this whole background there before I get into MonsoonSIM. And hopefully we have some time for Q&A. Okay? So first of all, who am I? This is my name. Those of you, not Jackie Chan, this is my name.
Just keep, no need.
Those of you who know me as John. Those of you who know me also know that the tagline to the movie is fairly accurate. This is what I do. I fight first and I ask questions later. Or I do first and I apologize later. But more seriously, who am I? I am an engineer by training. I'm also a tribologist. If you're interested in what tribology is, I'd be happy to give a 4-hour lecture after dinner. Please stay behind. I'm kidding. But you can ask me. I've been a MonsoonSIM certified trainer since 2015. 2015? Around there. And in that time, I've been involved with various processes of MonsoonSIM through SUSS. Now, like my colleague has already explained some of them. We use it in selection of students, student application, green harvesting, and fast tracking of certain students to our university program. Right. And that's what I do there. I also teach at SUSS, so I've had the privilege of teaching the full-time students at their very first years, and I informally follow them throughout the 4 years. It's sort of like an informal mentor. Whoever wants to come back to me, comes back to me. If you don't, fine. I'm not getting paid for it. It's not about the pay. But more than that, I'm also a sports person. I do a lot of extreme sports. I love extreme sports. I love water sports. I love martial arts. I'm also a parent. I have 2 lovely girls. One is 3, turning 3 next week. One is 7 months old. Now, why am I bringing this up to you? This doesn't seem very relevant. I'll get to that in a short while. Because most of my students see me as Jackie Chan like that, right? Ready to fight. But most of the time I feel like this. And most of the time I behave like this, right, Donald? Paramin said earlier, he's MonsoonSIM's troublemaker number 1, I'm probably number 2. Very close to getting number 1 soon. And so I asked myself this question a lot. What am I doing here? What am I doing here? So my time in SUSS has exposed me to a lot of the habits that our students have cultivated as a result of the education process. Most of formal education systems follow the same process. And I've also seen the shortcomings of that firsthand. So when I talk about things, not just in business concepts, I'm not a business lecturer. When I talk about sciences, when I talk about logical fallacies, when I talk about philosophy, they don't get it. When they can't see the connection between math and philosophy. We had that conversation, right? They can't see the connection between engineering and social studies, sociology. That's precisely what engineering is about. It's about creating spaces for humans. So how do you not make that connection? And so in the process, I kind of stumbled upon this experiential learning process, which was later revealed in hindsight to me by another colleague. And I hope that this can somehow convince you to tweak all your teaching materials and make use of that process. And I'll explain why. So a few apologies. These are a few apologies. There's a lot of historical background to what I'm saying. I'm going to bring you back into the past fairly often. Right? As a result, there's also going to be a lot of stories, a lot of metaphors. I'll try to keep it entertaining. Right? The worst case scenario, you can look at my face and laugh. I will not be offended. Right? And this is my apology to Abdi and Alex. I will not go into the details and the technical execution on MonsoonSIM. And there's a very good reason why. I will give a few examples of how I use them, but I'm not going to explain every single feature. Okay, and the last apology I have is my students tell me I have what they call an Instagram mouth. Okay, you guys know Instagram, right? So I didn't know. I asked them, so what do you mean by Instagram mouth? Instagram, you take photos, you put hashtags, and one of the most popular hashtags is no filter. I have no filter on my mouth. So I'm going to say things that might offend some of you. I don't mean to. I just say it as I feel it. Okay, and I apologize in advance.
You need filter, right? For you need filter. I give you the After this, I give you
This is the future of jobs. Okay, an World Economic Forum report in 2016 was repeated again in 2018 and reiterated at the beginning of this year for good reason. It talks about top 10 skills to thrive in 2020. And 2020 is next year. And if you look at the skills there, let me ask you a question. Are these skills largely qualitative or quantitative? Qualitative, right? Immediate response, qualitative. So why is it that in all our university programs, whether it is the social sciences or the humanities, we still talk about theories, we still talk about calculating mathematical formulas, statistics, probability. Right? Even in anthropology and sociology, we talk about gathering data, right? With no offense to data, it is important. Yes?
You asked why, right?
Yeah.
Because they're easy to assess and those are hard to assess.
Very good. So we already hit one problem here, okay, and I'll touch on that later in the next slide, right, actually. So we have all these things that we're doing in our educational systems. Now, are these skills important?
Yes.
The older skills, the ones that we're currently using, not the ones on the board.
Yeah.
Are these important? They are. I would say they are, and I would say that the reason why they're not here is because those are contextualized expressions of these skills. Mathematics is the form of complex problem solving, critical thinking, sometimes creativity. Engineering takes on more forms, and so on and so forth. So no matter what you do, you're going to return to these. Now, you mentioned that these are harder to assess, right? So the question then is, yes, these are important, but how? And that is the first problem. Now, if we look back at the common teaching process, what actually happens in the classroom, right? If I'm a teacher, I walk into the classroom, class, today we're going to study about the law of gravity, right? This is the theory, here's the formula, these are the functions, these are what you need to do about it. At some point, the student is going to practice something. I give you a few questions, you attempt the exercise. First time, you might not get it right. And then oh, look, you made a mistake. Here's your mistake. Here's what the theory says. Here's the ideal parameter you should have used. Now try that again. And hopefully he gets it right. This is your typical classroom process, whether in high school, in college, or in the university. Now this is great. I think this process is great. It's straightforward, it's efficient, it's polished, it's been done. My contention is that it's too clean.
Right. I would actually argue that a lot of the time it's only the first three.
A lot of time for
In
the
theory,
first three. Oh, okay.
The student attempts the exam.
Yeah.
Oh, look, you made a mistake.
And then you fail,
And
right?
you fail,
So
and
then
the
there
mark.
isn't even a correction, that's even worse.
End of story.
End of
That's
story.
it.
So that's also possible.
Because here you're talking about actually doing formative assessment, and a lot of that doesn't actually exist.
A lot of time that actually
It's
doesn't
just
happen.
straight to summative.
So I'm assuming that you have a conscientious teacher here who's doing something important. Right? And it's still, even if you stop at the third one, you're absolutely right. It's still a very straightforward process, but I think it's too clean. So that leads us to the problem that Derek just mentioned. Our first problem is that modern education systems don't support these traits. Now here's where I bring you back to a little bit of history. Our current education system is designed to give students a basic understanding of a process and then eject you out so that you can start a job. This was designed for the first industrial revolution. Let me repeat that, this was designed for the first industrial revolution. And just as we are no longer in the first industrial revolution, this system is a little outdated. The skills required are also a little outdated. Students can't survive on processes anymore. You have to have a deeper understanding. Unfortunately, this means that it's already had a long-term influence on our teaching methods, right? Sometimes we stop at number 3, on the way we assess things, which is why those skills are hard to assess. We have a fairly linear, unidirectional learning process. Right? Exactly. Right. Unfortunately, this also means that instructors are not equipped for something more advanced, something more abstract. I wasn't equipped. I had to learn this the hard way. So I stumbled upon the sheer chance. And then you have the question, can those skills be taught? Can you teach creativity? That sounds like an oxymoron. Can you teach people management skills? Sure, there are some guidelines. Can you teach the entire thing? I'm not so sure. Not in the classroom context. So I can see him nodding there. Not in the classroom, not the way we've done it in the classroom for so far. So that leads me back to what I mentioned at my introduction. I do a lot of other things besides being an academic. How did I learn those skills? How did you learn how to dribble a football? Or shoot a basketball? Or swim a racket? How did you learn how to type, read, speak? Professional skills. Okay? How did we learn all those? Let's pay a visit to our common history as mankind. We're looking at the apprenticeship model. This is really far behind. Right? So we're not going to look at something so modern. Okay. In the past, if you wanted to survive, you had to have a trade. You had to do something, you sold something, you made something, you provided a service. Even if you were a bandit, it was a trade. Every trade has a craft. And I'm going to break that down further. Every craft has 3 components. 1, you have an object, a thing that you manipulate. 2, you have an objective, where you hope to achieve or what you actually achieve. And 3, you have a skill, how you reach from the object to the objective, how you manipulate the thing. So take a traditional craft, carpentry. Let's try this. What's the object? Wood. Okay, wood of a particular kind, of one kind, usually just one kind. What's the objective? A bench or a final desired shape, right? And then you have the skills, plenty of them. You'll notice that other traditional crafts also follow the same pattern, whether you're talking about traditional medicine, physical movement, or material crafting. You all have an object, objective, and a skill. This is very different from our idea of having a theory that you need to follow. And as a result, because you have a different frame of conceptualization of what a trade encompasses, you also have a different process by which you learn it. Okay, so that's the history. What were the roles and processes earlier on? It's fairly simple, right? Assuming you have a conscientious teacher who corrects you, the teacher narrates, student absorbs, corrects, right? And hopefully you don't have to repeat it anymore. You get it right the second time round. Now this is not what happened in the past. In apprenticeship, you have a master and an apprentice. Typically, the parents send the apprentice to the master. You stay with the master for the next 10 years of your life, and you pick up his trade. But the master doesn't have the time to sit you down and look, here's how you hold the anvil and the hammer. You strike it with 50 newtons of force. He has to make a living. So the master simply performs the craft. He does it in front of the apprentice. And the apprentice isn't sitting there watching. The apprentices in this picture are assisting. You prepare the fire. You hold the tool. Right? You do smaller tasks in the process of learning the craft. Very often you don't actually learn the craft. Right? You simply observe. And you're not observing in the sense that I want to pick it up from you. You're observing because, oh, look, my master is ready. I need to hand him the poker. I need to hand him the hot steel. He needs this tool now. Right? So you're observing in order to produce a reaction, not so that, oh, that's what he does. That's passive. It's very active. It keeps on going. At some point of time, you're going to emulate. The senior apprentice there is emulating. And very often, you simply copy exactly what the master does over time. The posture, the hand strikes, and so on. You may attempt to supervision, and at some point, the master is just going to have to guide you because he gets too old. And then you take over. Hopefully, you take over. Otherwise, you'll find someone else. Now, the highlight here is not that the apprentice does more. It kind of he does, but because we're breaking down the verbs into very discrete actions. But rather that the mode of instruction and transfer of information is different. At no point does the master say, you stand this way, and you hold this hammer, and you strike it in this way. The guy just picks it up. So through observation, through mimicry, and so on and so forth. And we like to attribute this to this saying that we see rather often. Right? I have two pieces of bad news for you. If you're planning to take a photo of this, don't take a photo of this. Don't take a photo of this. Right? Because the first is, this is not experiential learning. I'm sorry. This is not the entirety of experiential learning. The second is that Confucius never said this.
Yes.
This was a very bad translation from the original by Xun Huang. Right? For those of you who can read Mandarin, 不闻不若闻之，闻之不若见之，见之不若知之，知之不若行之，学止夷，行之而止夷. And you translate that, I'm showing off a bit here, I'm sorry. You translate that, this is what it means. I don't have to read that out. But pay attention to the last two lines. Only when action sprouts can learning, can it be said, something has to be said to be truly learned. That's vastly different from I do and I understand. This is only when it naturally forms an action can I have said to truly learn something. Right? These are like, I have no idea how the first translation came about, but it's definitely not the same meaning. Donna wants to take a picture of this one. So we go back to the idea of experiential learning, and it is not the same as doing to learn. Right? Doing to learn is a very is what Derek said earlier, and it's a very modern Western scientific concept. What we typically do if we do to learn is we try various practice systematically until it works. Systematically, so we're not trying at random. And then, oh, something works, and possibly we do a retrospective analysis. Not always, sometimes we just leave it and it works. Right? The problem with this is that this creates a linear path. It is correlational, it is often reductionist, you've isolated everything else. Right? If you remember your high school, your secondary school science, a basic experiment is where you control everything else and you vary one variable, but that doesn't happen, right? That doesn't happen in the real world. So what is experiential learning? We've already covered this earlier on in the cycle that Derek brought up, but let me rephrase it into terms that I've used earlier on. It's an object-objective relationship. You have a craft, you have the end product of a craft. You must have a reflection on that end product. It becomes the object of reflection. And the object of reflection then reaches an objective. The objective must be conceptualized. Conceptualization occurs, you must put it back into an experiment. And when you have that experiment, it goes back into the craft. It becomes the object of the craft. Right? So it is cyclical, it is the formation and reformation of ideas. I'm speaking through this because this was summarized earlier on by what Derek put up. So yeah, this is like, oh, that looks familiar. So we've had this. We've had this exact same thing. I'm glad that we're on the same page. Validation. And you can rephrase this as alternating between grasping knowledge and understanding knowledge. Grasp, understand. Grasp, understand. And now some of us educators, especially myself, we are familiar with this thing called learning styles. And the good part about this cycle is that learning styles are all encompassing that. So I'm very experimental. I'm going to spend a lot of time between these two, which is what most of our students do most of the time. But if I'm a melancholy, contemplative, emo teenager, then I'm going to spend a lot of time between these two. You see where I'm getting at? Okay. But if I actually want to learn, I will move eventually from this to this. Most of the time the emo kids don't, so they stay there. I was an emo kid once, I know. So what does that mean for us? Remember the earlier two sayings that we've had. I see and I forget, I do and I understand, and then you've had, only when action sprouts can it be said to have truly learned. Now you realize that this actually encompasses the experiential learning cycle. As I do, I understand. As I understand, action sprouts. As I act, I understand more. It is a continual grasping and understanding of knowledge. Now let's go back to this. Suddenly it seems a lot easier to cultivate these traits. And I'm going to suggest that these 5 traits in bold are naturally cultivated if you were to use the experiential learning cycle. You have no choice, otherwise you will not complete the cycle. If the cycle involves interaction with human beings, then you add another 3, another 4. And the only one you're missing out is service orientation. Now I have no idea how to do that. But you have 9 out of 10. That's not too bad. Where does MonsoonSIM come into the picture? Right, so I've talked all about that. That's the background. Let's look at our craft. We have a craft called economics. Can someone suggest what is the object of this craft?
Make money. Prosper. Make money.
Profit, okay. Money. Money is the object of this craft.
Wealth creation and accumulation.
Wealth creation and accumulation, okay. So accumulation or creation of wealth, right? All these things. The object is the thing you manipulate. So these sound more like objectives.
Oh, sorry, I thought you asked for object.
Oh, I'm sorry. The object. The object can be loosely termed. We actually have a lot of terms for that, but the object can be loosely termed as the market. All the various forces, you're manipulating them. Your objective is one of many. And then your skills are also plentiful. Now in the case of MonsoonSIM, one of our biggest KPIs in the game is to maximize profit. And to do that, you use a set of skills, which are actually expressions of the skills, the 10 skills, but they're put into a context of a craft, of economics, with an object and an objective. When you reframe it that way, sorry, you want to take photos?
Yes, please.
I saw the camera come up.
Nice. Okay, thank you.
When you reframe it that way, then it looks like you can do something with MonsoonSIM. Oops, one more. Do you want that? You got that? Okay. So when I looked at it that way, I was like, okay, so what can I do with this? What do we have in MonsoonSIM? I already have multiple factors I can play with. I have multiple objectives to consider and assign, and I don't have to teach my kids how to use a computer. Right? So it's easy, it's intuitive for them. What can we do besides torturing my students? I actually do torture them. Right? I throw them in the deep end. I'll explain what I mean. Instead of starting off with 4 modules, I'm sorry, Paramin, I start them off with 12. Right, you go full steam, but I slow it down. I don't give them 15 seconds a day. I slow it down. You have time to communicate, you have time to look at your data one more time, flip between modules for a while. I give them a reason or an excuse to reflect. I throw them in the deep end in the sense that I don't take it easy. This is the full game, but let's slow it down. And then you create learnable scenarios. You add in a bit of showmanship, a bit of drama. You toss things up. I'm going to talk about all 4 in one example. And then you give you give a measured amount of guidance. I wouldn't call it only a measured amount of guidance, but an appropriate amount. Okay, so here's a scenario. Here's an example of what happened. I had this team who was, these guys are brilliant. You know which team I'm talking about. This particular team, among our teams, they were brilliant. Right? They had a head for data. They were seeing numbers like Picasso would see images. I don't know how they do it, but they do it. And they came to me and said, I have a hypothesis. I think that this factor that we can control has this direct relationship with this outcome. Right? And I said, okay, fair enough. It's a computer system. It has algorithms. It follows some rules. So why don't we test it out? So we test it out. We put it against the robots. It seems to work. We put it against another human team. It works a bit less, but it still worked. Because I guess there's an element of human unpredictability there, but it still worked. And so they were like happy, and I said, okay, let's try it one more time, 3 times to create a perfect line. But I was a bit sneaky. I told the second team, okay, now you have a different objective. Your objective is not to maximize profit. I don't care how much profit or how much you lose. I want you to maximize market share. So one team thinks he's maximizing profit, the other team has to maximize market share. And suddenly their algorithm goes off the charts. They lose big time. What happened? Was the algorithm wrong? They came back and said, no, I think we're wrong. I said, no, you had it right the first 2 times. Don't go off the charts. There's something you haven't considered. So what do you think? Then I reveal that background. So they capitalize on market share. I didn't tell them that I told them to capitalize on market share. I said, their strategy was to maximize market share. And therefore, with the little profit they got with each sale, they won. So how do you beat a team like that? By refining your algorithm. Let's go back to the drawing board. Let's do that again. And then refine. We went back and forth like this, adding one factor at a time, until they think they've come up with a pretty resilient algorithm. Okay, but that's only because I haven't changed the parameters during the game. If the facilitator were to do that, I think a lot of things change. So we haven't gotten to that stage. But that's what I mean by a measured amount of guidance. They have to be the ones who start conceptualizing it themselves. It's very different if I conceptualize it for them and I pass it on to them. That way, they can start creating their own formula. Now here's the big question. If we're talking about education as a holistic system, can we return to this model, the apprenticeship model, the experiential learning model for education? How many of you say yes? How many of you say no? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. How many of you not quite sure?
All of them.
all the rest, right? All of the rest. Okay. My guess is sadly no. That came out. My guess is sadly no. Not completely. And here's the second problem we have. I mentioned problem 1. Problem number 2 is the pace of learning today does not match the pace of the world's demand.
Yes.
Right? We have a change, a very quick change, a frequency of change in society's demands. We have increased competition, density and connectivity of the world. We have increased rate of expansion of knowledge and domains. We can't keep up. We can barely keep up with our social media feeds. Forget about academic discipline. And forget about putting it into experiential learning. Experiential learning, Derek rightfully put, requires some time. You need that space to go through the cycle. So if you do a comparison between the two systems, the modern system versus the apprenticeship system, There are advantages to both. The modern system is straightforward, it's direct, it's clean. You understand the theory, it's very quick. But you're leaving out a lot of other factors. It's reductionist. It's almost linear. And if something changes, if we discover that there's a new particle in the laws of physics, we have to change everything from ground up. It is not very flexible. Other traditional crafts, however, apprenticeship, it takes ages to learn. We don't have that time. But when you learn it, you're able to apply the same set of skills across various forms of that craft. What do I mean? Remember, we talked about wood earlier on. Now, so if I were a carpenter in those days, I worked with pine. Pine is very hard. I work with teak. Teak is very hard, right? And I require a certain weight of axe, a certain sharpness to cut through it, a certain way I hold my axe and I swing it. And if one day all the teak were to go out, I could use the same skills and translate that to pine. But pine is thinner, it's softer. It may be softer. It may have different material properties, and I need to adjust my tools, my skills, according to what I need to achieve. Yet, my object is the same, my objective is the same, the skills are the same. I have an overall theme of wood, and I've applied that to a specific instance of the theme. So you can use the same skills. It was only when I discovered this that I realized, hey, engineering is about creating social spaces. It is about sociology. I'm a mechanical engineer by training. Suddenly it all makes sense. Why do we need that length? Why do we fashion cantilever beams? There are no pillars in the center of this room. Engineers will know what I mean. Right? That's exactly what we do. We create spaces for human beings. And we therefore need to understand the human perception of space, of privacy, of openness or of closeness. And that varies even between cultures, so anthropology comes in as well. So we can't change the system right over to apprenticeship right away. It's not going to work. But what we can do is we can cultivate new learning habits in our students. We can get them to repeat that process over and over again until it becomes a habit. Or we repeat it in front of them. Keep questioning them. And later on I'll mention what you need to question. I think was said. Now you can teach theoretical processes in an experiential way. I once, as a poor undergraduate, I once gave tuition to A-level students to make up for some income loss. And one of these guys was, in Singapore terms, the Hokkien Peng. He was a guy who didn't really care about his studies. He just wanted to play basketball, and he was a star basketballer. But he was failing his A-level physics so badly that the school was going to kick him out. And so his mom was a friend of my mom, who of course knew me. Right? And then called me in and said, okay, it's not getting through to you. All this Newton's law, kinematics, and everything is just not working. Let's go play basketball. So we had a very fun time in our second lesson, playing 2 hours of basketball and getting paid for it. But after 2 hours of basketball, you tell them, okay, so how do you know, if I'm blocking you, how do you know what angle to shoot the ball? How do you know it's going to go into the net? How do you know how you position your hand and how much force you use? That's trajectory motion, projectile motion. How do you know the ball is going to bounce down and bounce back up or the other way? Right? Trajectories, physics, gravity. And suddenly, he saw it. Suddenly, everything made sense to him. I only had one more lesson after that lesson with him. I didn't see him for 6 months. He took his A-levels, he got an A. So it really wasn't me. It was nothing to do with me. He just needed a translator. I was the translator, one time. And that was it. He understood everything from then on. No problem. The guy's brilliant. The guy is brilliant.
开窍，开窍。
I tell. So you change perceptions of skills and tasks. You're no longer talking about processes. Remember, you have the object, the objective, and the skill. And that changes how we deal with things. Not everything can be solved by a formula. Not everything, some things can. And then you inculcate iterative reflection and questioning of assumptions. Right? Always question the assumption. Right? It was pointed out earlier, and assumptions make the basis of any conclusion. If you question the process, that usually doesn't work. If you question the conclusion, the guy feels attacked most of the time. At least my students feel attacked. So I question, okay, you came to this conclusion. What did you assume to reach that conclusion? And most of the time, they're not aware that they made the assumption. Right? Stereotypes. All Chinese are good at math. I'm not. I'm not. I'm really not. And then you have all these funny assumptions that they make, and it moves forward. And a lot of these, they don't even know they're making them. So when you open your eyes, you assume that this was the case, and therefore you extrapolate it from there. But your assumption, your very basis for your conclusion is wrong. Can you rework that? Question the assumption. Prove it. I want to hear your rationale. Justify this case. And when you're done, rework your conclusion all over again. It's a lot of work. They will not like it. Right? Which is my first disclaimer. Your students are not going to like it. Unfortunately. It is painful, it is long. They just want the answer. Just show me how to get to the answer. And if truth be told, all of us want that because society is moving so fast. We don't have time to look at that. Full disclaimer, your bosses are not going to like it, right? Because rightfully pointed out, it is very difficult to justify such assessment. How do you do that? How do you quantify whether the person has learned a qualitative skill? You can't, or not easily at least. And most of the time, our bosses in educational institutions don't really like seeing that there. There's no way you can put that down on paper. The second disclaimer is that if you choose to do this method, it will not be easy. It takes a lot of time. I see students in year 1, some of them choose to stick around and hang out with me until year 4. Our first batch has just graduated and they come back to me and they tell me, you know, now I see what you were trying to do. After 5 years, now I see what you were trying to do. Can I buy you coffee? I say, yes, now you may. For 4 years I've rejected their coffee. Now you may, now that you see it, you may. It will take a very long time and it will not be easy. It's a lot of time consumption. And my last disclaimer or warning is there is some strange irony in me giving this talk. So first of all, I'm an engineer. I'm not a social scientist. This really isn't my domain. And in all fairness, I'm no expert in this. I'm sorry, Donald. I'm no expert in this. But this is what I've done. My second irony is that I'm actually telling you the theory of something that must be experienced. Strange. Which is why I can't list out every single detail about how you can craft a MonsoonSIM game into this. Most of you know your students very well. I think you know them better than I do, of course. And so you have to find a way that speaks to them specifically in their context in order to pull this up. And when you pull out that basic assumption questioning habit, then all is good. And then they've got to keep that habit going. And the third irony that I have is that talks are usually meant to conclude and give you with a oomph, right? This is the selling point. This is my conclusion. All is good with the world. This talk does not do that. This is my journey, as I mentioned, and I'm still on it, and I invite you to take it with me. If you haven't realized, I've just led you through the entire experiential learning cycle from this talk. Think about that. Thank you.